A man with private jets, mansions and friends in the highest places, found lifeless in one of the most guarded jails in America. The world was told it was a self-inflicted act. But could a man surrounded by so much power simply disappear in the dark, without help, without witnesses? Tonight, we revisit the body, the mind, and the truth that still disturbs the United States. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born on January 20th, 1953 in Seagate, a modest neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. His father worked for the city, his mother in a public school. By all accounts, he was ordinary, until his teachers discovered his sharp gift for mathematics. Former classmates describe him as intelligent, intense, and socially uneasy. He wanted admiration but not connection. That hunger for recognition would later evolve into domination. In his early 20s, Epstein left college without a degree and joined the Dalton School in Manhattan as a math teacher. Dalton was elite, filled with children of bankers and lawyers. Epstein quickly learned something more valuable than algebra. Influence opens every door. Students remember the young teacher's strange confidence, bright shirts, a heavy fur coat, an exaggerated smile. He flirted with boundaries, even with teenage students, hiding behind charm and intellect. It was there, in those marble corridors, that the first version of the man he would become took shape. By the late 1970s, Epstein traded the classroom for Wall Street. He joined Towers Financial Corporation, run by investor Stephen Hoffenberg, and quickly proved to be both brilliant and dangerous. Behind closed doors, Towers became a pyramid of lies, promising impossible returns. When it collapsed, Hoffenberg went to prison. Epstein walked away untouched, wealthier, colder, and convinced that rules were for other people. Through charm and intimidation, he built a mysterious empire. He owned luxury homes in Manhattan and Palm Beach, a private jet, and a 70-acre island in the Caribbean. He surrounded himself with presidents, princes, and billionaires: Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, and others whose names never reached the headlines. To outsiders, Epstein was a financial genius. To those who worked for him, he was an unpredictable tyrant, charismatic one moment, cruel the next. Psychologists would later call his traits narcissistic and antisocial. No empathy, no guilt, only control. Behind his marble walls, Epstein built a system of sexual exploitation designed like a business model. He recruited teenage girls, some only 14, offering money for what he called massages. Once inside, they were trapped. He paid victims to bring new ones, turning the abuse into a chain. Some were given anti-anxiety pills or sedatives, making them dependent, compliant. Inside his mansions and aboard his jet known as the Lolita Express, hidden cameras recorded everything. Investigators later believed those recordings served as leverage over powerful visitors, a perfect web of seduction, money, and blackmail. His closest associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, handled logistics, travel, gifts, introductions. She would later face her own convictions for helping him. For years, the pattern continued, protected by his wealth and his connections. The victims were silenced, and Epstein's influence seemed endless. But in 2008, cracks finally appeared. In Palm Beach, Florida, detectives built a massive case. Dozens of minors, similar stories, similar methods. Yet what followed stunned the world. Through one of the most extraordinary plea deals in American history, federal prosecutors granted Epstein immunity from further federal charges. The arrangement, engineered under Alexander Acosta, then U.S. Attorney, allowed him to serve 13 months in a local facility. He was permitted to leave 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, allegedly to work. Reports claim that during those work releases, he continued to meet young women flown in from New York. To Epstein, it was proof of his invincibility. He had bent justice itself, and when Acosta later joined the presidential cabinet, it only reinforced the illusion that Epstein's reach had no limits. More than a decade later, in July 6, 2019, Epstein's private jet touched down at Teterboro Airport, New Jersey. FBI agents surrounded the plane. He was arrested on new charges of trafficking minors across state lines, charges that could keep him in prison for the rest of his life. At 66, Epstein entered the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, an aging, high-security complex that had once held drug lords and terrorists. Gone were the private chefs and silk sheets. His new world was concrete, steel, and noise. His bail request was denied on July 15th. Inmates and guards noticed the change immediately. His beard grew uneven, his hair unwashed, his eyes distant. The man who once controlled presidents now couldn't control the light switch in his cell. Soon, rumors spread that envelopes of cash were being delivered to families of former victims, perhaps Epstein's final attempt to buy silence from behind bars. But even money had limits inside those walls. July 23rd, 2019. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, guards responded to a disturbance in Epstein's cell. He was found semi-conscious, with bruising around his neck. His cellmate insisted there had been no fight. Epstein was taken for treatment and then placed on constant observation, a special unit where lights never turn off and every movement is watched. There, he slept on the floor and stopped bathing. The decline was rapid. A week later, without clear explanation, officials reclassified him as low risk. On August 9th, he returned to a normal cell in the special housing unit. 2 officers were assigned to check him every 30 minutes. That night, both officers fell asleep. During his final days, Epstein met with his lawyers for up to 12 hours daily, trying to rebuild his legal defense. They described him as calm, focused, even optimistic. But inside, something else was taking form. On August 8th, 2 days before the tragedy, Epstein signed his final will, moving his entire fortune into a trust in the Virgin Islands, a structure that would make it almost impossible for victims to claim restitution. To psychologists, it was the ultimate gesture of control. Even stripped of freedom, he would control his legacy. In the early hours of August 10th, Jeffrey Epstein was found kneeling on the cell floor, a bedsheet tied to the upper bunk and looped around his neck. There were no cries, no struggle, no witness. When guards finally checked, the body was already still. When his body was brought to the medical examiner's table, the headlines had already decided the story. But inside that cold white room, under fluorescent light, the truth refused to stay silent. What they found inside Jeffrey Epstein's body would ignite a debate that still burns today. The examination started only a few hours after the discovery. Dr. Barbara Sampson, chief medical examiner of New York City, led the procedure. On the stainless steel table lay the body of a 66-year-old man, 6 feet tall, athletic frame, still wearing faint bruises around the neck. Technicians photographed every inch before the first incision. The ligature mark circled the neck like a pale groove, angled upward toward the jaw, consistent at first glance with a self-inflicted hanging. But beneath that skin lay a mystery. When the layers of tissue were separated, 3 distinct fractures appeared, 1 in the hyoid bone and 2 across the thyroid cartilage. These breaks were rare and immediately controversial. The hyoid bone, shaped like a horseshoe, protects the larynx and rarely snaps unless the neck endures significant pressure. In cases of hanging, it can fracture in older men due to brittle bones. Yet in manual compression, it almost always breaks. Epstein had both patterns at once, an anatomical paradox. To interpret those fractures, investigators reconstructed the scene. Epstein's bunk stood barely 5 feet high. He was found kneeling, not suspended, his weight leaning forward. A torn bedsheet served as the ligature, wide enough to distribute pressure unevenly. Dr. Michael Hunter, one of America's leading forensic pathologists, later reviewed the available data. He concluded that such fractures could occur in a shallow angle hanging using a soft fabric, though they were unusual. The injuries neither confirmed nor disproved external force. No defensive wounds were detected on his hands or arms. There were minor abrasions on both wrists, most likely from daily handcuff use while being escorted to meetings. No foreign DNA was recovered from beneath his fingernails. Every test came back negative for narcotics or alcohol. Inside the cell, investigators catalogued common items: antacids, a bottle of milk of magnesia, simple painkillers, but nothing illegal or sedative. If Epstein had wanted to quietly fade away through overdose, the materials weren't there. The internal examination exposed another anomaly: hepatic steatosis, a fatty liver condition. Epstein was lean, not obese, and rarely drank alcohol. Such damage, experts explained, can appear after long-term anabolic steroid use, a shortcut to build muscle and enhance libido. Several former victims had described his obsession with maintaining a youthful, powerful physique. Medical literature links abrupt withdrawal from steroids to severe depressive states and impulsive self-harm. If his access ended the day he entered prison, the physiological crash could have been catastrophic. Every organ was weighed, measured, photographed. His heart showed mild coronary plaque, common for his age. Lungs were clear, no trace of poison, no hidden injection marks, no neurological disease. By the book, the body told a single story: exhaustion, despair, and control lost. But outside that room, the world was telling another. 2 correctional officers were assigned to observe Epstein that night, checking every 30 minutes. Instead, both fell asleep for nearly 3 hours. When they awoke, it was too late. Security logs were falsified, and later prosecutors proved it. The guards admitted negligence, but insisted there was no outside interference. Still, skeptics asked, how could 2 trained officers both fail at the same time on that night with that inmate? Cameras outside the cell confirmed that no one entered or left during the critical window. Yet for many Americans, those frames answered nothing. In an age of influence and hidden favors, coincidence was hard to believe. Epstein's brother hired a private forensic expert who argued that the fractures suggested manual strangulation. Dr. Sampson's office stood by its ruling: death by self-inflicted act. 2 official opinions, 1 corpse, and 1 billion unanswered questions. Documents revealed that only 48 hours before his death, Epstein had signed a new will, transferring his entire fortune, an estimated $577 million, into a private trust registered in the Virgin Islands. The timing was impossible to ignore. Forensic psychologists interpreted it as the ultimate assertion of power. Even stripped of freedom, he would decide who touched his wealth, who benefited, and who suffered. He had been placed on observation precisely because of mental health concerns, yet this legal maneuver raised no red flags. No one intervened. To experts like Dr. Hunter, that failure symbolized the system's collapse as clearly as the fractures in his neck. 6 days later, the official report declared the cause a self-inflicted act by hanging. Within minutes, speculation flooded the world. From Washington to London, whispers tied his death to politics, royalty, finance, an invisible empire of secrets. The FBI raided his properties, seizing hard drives, cameras, and folders labeled with famous names. Inside, investigators discovered what they believed were recordings from hidden bedroom cameras, potentially used for blackmail. If true, it explained both his untouchable life and his mysterious end. Still, evidence for homicide remained absent. No sign of intrusion, no second DNA, no defensive fight. The simplest explanation, forensic experts said, was often the hardest to accept. 2 months later, the Bureau of Prisons admitted serious procedural failures. The warden was reassigned, and the guards pleaded guilty to falsifying records. Each avoided prison in exchange for community service. For the victims, justice dissolved overnight. The criminal case closed the moment his heart stopped beating, leaving civil lawsuits to fight over offshore trusts and frozen accounts. To understand why he might choose this path, psychologists reconstructed his personality from decades of evidence. They described a narcissist of grand scale, a man who fed on control and status. Losing both confined and exposed was a psychological death long before the physical one. Prison stripped away every illusion of superiority. For a man like Epstein, humiliation was worse than punishment. Signing the will, arranging his affairs, projecting calm to his lawyers, these were not random acts. They were part of a final performance, a way to end on his terms. Still, some believe he underestimated the chaos his absence would unleash. Without him alive, every theory multiplied, and in that noise, the truth became harder to hear. After his passing, thousands of legal pages were unsealed, exposing networks of enablers and survivors' testimonies. Civil courts continue to battle over compensation from his estate. Ghislaine Maxwell was later sentenced for her role in the trafficking network, but for many victims, it felt incomplete. Dr. Michael Hunter summarized it best. All evidence points to a self-inflicted act, yet it is one that the system allowed to happen. A death by negligence as much as by despair. Dish. In the end, the autopsy of Jeffrey Epstein did more than examine a body. It dissected an institution. It exposed how wealth, privilege, and secrecy can corrode accountability until the line between accident and design disappears. Science can explain the fractures, but not the silence. Justice can close a case, but not a wound. And in the echo of that prison cell, one truth remains. The powerful may escape the law, but never the truth written inside their own bodies. If you believe that every body tells a story, one that power cannot erase, subscribe and stay with us, because next time we open another file where medicine meets mystery. If stories like this make you question what really hides behind power and fame, subscribe and stay with us, because here every body still speaks, even after the final hour.